It's my honor to bring back an old friend of the organization, someone who has spoken on the podcast, has written some blogs, has served as an intern, and is currently on our board. So it's my pleasure to reintroduce you to Tianna Soto. Our friend is a Puerto Rican, Jamaican-Chinese writer, speaker, and mental health educator based in New York City. She received a master's in clinical psychology and education from Columbia University and is a certified yoga and mindfulness instructor. Her ongoing mission is to empower others to embrace their journey with clarity and confidence. Tianna, thank you so much for joining us. Our conversation today is on stillness, is on mindfulness, is on meditation. And for those of you that are listening or watching and have been keyed into the Trite Love podcast for a minute, you'll recognize that this is perhaps a bit of a similar conversation than with what we had with Tianna a couple years back for our Black and White campaign. But I'd like to kind of start there. What is mindfulness? What is the topic that we are talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many places we could theoretically begin with talking about mindfulness, but I guess I can share a little bit of my story and what mindfulness means to me. It's a pretty broad term that I think is very buzzy nowadays, especially in Western, meaning like mostly United States culture. And for me, so I'll take it back a little bit. I came to understand mindfulness probably not until the end of college and graduating. But when I think back to my time in college, I was quite disconnected from myself in mind, in body, in spirit, in soul. Not every day, but on a lot of days. If there are any college students listening or just working professionals, you know how chaotic our world can be and how busy things can get. And when I think of myself as a younger person and as a student, I felt like I was just going through the motions, wasn't really present with my thoughts and my body. And I was just trying to kind of check things off of my to-do list every day, constantly running around, trying to stay afloat. And so back then, I wasn't really thinking about terms like mindfulness or meditation. I'd heard about them used in, spiritual contexts and some educational contexts, but I didn't really have a personal connection or practice to it. And my senior year of college, I became very burnt out. Again, if there's any college students listening and maybe you're having senioritis, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I certainly had that feeling and was like ready to graduate, didn't really know what I wanted to do after school, was passionate about 2 million things and couldn't make up my mind. But at the very core, I was super tired. I had packed my plate so heavily with obligations and classes and extracurriculars and leadership roles that like I was unwell. So wasn't sleeping great, was getting a lot of headaches, didn't really want to hang out with friends, pretty anxious, pretty depressed at times. And that's how I met mindfulness. I'll never forget one day during my senior year of college being so exhausted and burnt out. And I'm pretty sure I was about to go to a cappella practice or something like that, some obligation I had to run to yet again. And I remember sitting in my room and like having this really heavy cry and realizing that my body couldn't take anymore what I had been putting it through for years. And something told me to go to YouTube and try a yoga video. Up until this point, I had never done yoga before. I had taken some like Pilates and exercise classes here and there, but didn't really have a connection to it. And I was really introduced to mindfulness, I'd say on YouTube, started doing gentle yoga stretches, learning about my body. And I realized how not mindful I had been for so long. So mindfulness, as I've come to learn and understand it, is bringing your awareness to the present moment and not judging what comes up in that present moment. And the non-judgment piece is so huge because a lot of times when we tune into ourselves, a lot comes up to the surface.
I mean, I think that's super, super cool, super important, and probably not altogether unique that mindfulness kind of revealed itself to you as a therapeutic thing, not as a as a BuzzFeed trend, not as, just it wasn't in kind of the popular vernacular at that moment, but we have seen it over the years become um, a bit more familiar, just in conversation. You see headlines about mindfulness and meditation. You see a number of books on it, and knowing that we're not too far apart in age and what our college experience would have looked like. I know that this term mindfulness for me never really entered my realm of consciousness until probably about 8 or 10 years ago. And I feel like since then, it's really taken off. You mentioned having all these pressures that on some level you chose, your clubs, your initiatives, your course load. And we're now in a world where there's a lot of things competing for our attention that aren't chosen. Political unrest, the pandemic, all sorts of inconsistencies and things that are kind of shaking us, grabbing our attention. You said mindfulness is about being attentive to the moment, but so many things are trying to pull us away from that. How do you see these past couple years with vaguely everything around us really kind of adding to this cultural intrigue about mindfulness? What is it about these past few years that has made mindfulness more of something that we want to chase, more something that we're interested in investing our time into?
I think that there's so much chaos. Not even what I think, there is so much chaos in this country and in this world. Like you said, a lot is competing for our attention. I think about my never ending email inbox or notifications on my phone, or if you're a student, like, checking things off your to do list. I find that because our outer world, our external world can be so loud and chaotic and busy, that lately there's been kind of a shift in people wanting to make their inner world the opposite of that, which I think is a lot easier said than done. But at least in my world and in folks that I've worked with, I've seen that a lot. It's like maybe almost a sense of trying to control your experience. And I'm hesitant to use the word control because that can get a little sticky. But I find that when the outside world is loud and moving quickly, there might be this need to make our inner world a little more still and peaceful. I also think that in the past year, a lot of folks are talking about this thing called the Great Resignation, where a lot of people are leaving their chaotic jobs and seeking opportunities that are more fulfilling and speak to people's passions. And I think with the pandemic and, like you said, social unrest, political unrest, all these cultural conversations we're having, people are really being forced to think about what matters to them and what's actually important. And at the end of the day, when you're dealing with health concerns, campus closures, all of these things that disrupt our life and create turbulence, like all of that can push us in a direction of perspective and realizing, like, hey, actually my family is really important to me, or my significant other is my biggest support system and I want to, spend more time with them instead of having all these late nights at the office. So yeah, I think people are being kind of forced, but also asked to, consider what is really important to them. And for some, that's taking care of their body and health.
That's a really interesting word that you brought up there with turbulence. And when I'm thinking of being out on a boat and you have a lot of wind or a lot of other boats creating a wake, and that turbulence is likely not going to threaten your boat turning over, but it will affect the efficiency of that boat getting you from point A to point B. When you are taking a flight and you are 30,000 feet up in the air and you feel that jitter and you feel that drop, again, that sense of turbulence is not going to derail the flight, but it will make it less efficient, less comfortable. It will distract you from what is really happening, which is we're traveling somewhere that years ago we wouldn't have been able to do that. It strikes me that turbulence is really kind of a byproduct of our belief in utter efficiency. That we are, I mean, hell, we're having this conversation now that would be impossible even 7 years ago, to have a steadily streaming video face-to-face phone call
Right.
about something like this. I feel like so much in my mind with mindfulness is being aware that what we are going through, no one else has been through until this very day. We are faced with pressures on our time, pressures on our bandwidth, pressures on our abilities that our parents, grandparents, and their grandparents had never even imagined. Um, and yet, mindfulness is this gift that has been with us for countless generations. You mentioned yoga being your first introduction. When did it occur to you that this ancient practice of yoga could be this emotional and mental health maintenance tool of mindfulness as well? Or what were they always synced up for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of people who hear about yoga or see yoga content online assume that it's about being like flexible and bendy and doing all these, really intense postures. But for me, and I think at the very core of yoga, is the practice of intentionally carving out time for yourself. So if it's sitting on the ground or laying on your mat in your dorm room or going for, a little stretch break in your house, whatever it is, that is yoga. And so for me, I found that practice of carving out time for myself was in itself mindfulness. In college, I just never did that. And so when I rolled my mat out and made the intentional decision to sit down and be free of distraction, be free of my laptop and all of that, that kind of woke me up to what mindfulness can do, which is, the chaos of the world kind of melts away and you're forced to be present with yourself. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I realized that they kind of did go hand in hand for me. And you can practice mindfulness through yoga, and there's a lot of practices within mindfulness. So it's kind of a broad term, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, you also brought up yet another great word of intent. It sounded like your yoga practice, your mindfulness practice began not when you began the stretch, but when you decided now is the time I'm going to unroll the mat and get the like it it strikes me that it is rather easy to start a mindfulness journey. Now, cultivating that will, of course, take time. It may take a lifetime, but the first step can be as simple as just making a decision. Hey, here is something I'm going to do for myself.
mindfulness and meditation and yoga and all these great practices will mean something different to everyone. But I think mindfulness, that act of bringing your awareness to the present moment without judgment, is a decision.
Hmm.
Whether it's, the choice to turn off your notifications or go on do not disturb so that you can protect your peace during the workday, or taking a break at work to have 10 deep breaths. Like, that is a decision you're making to pause the chaos that's going on, show up for yourself, and I don't know, have a moment of stillness. And earlier, I think it's funny you brought up turbulence, because I was on a flight yesterday and the turbulence was quite bad. There was a storm happening, and the pilot was making all these announcements, didn't want the flight attendants moving around because the weather was truly turbulent. And I remember getting a little nervous at times. I had been sort of tired on the plane. And I remember thinking, okay, I cannot control the weather. I cannot control this plane, but I can control how I'm showing up in this moment. And I'm going to put my laptop down and breathe. So, again, with that intention piece and the decision to carve out time, it is easy to start, but I think sticking with it sometimes can be harder in the long term. So,
Yeah, we had a brief journey into this theme on our last episode of the podcast. We were talking about picking battles that you're able to win, that you don't need to get it all right all at once. But a lot of it's being aware of the context that you find yourself in. Am I on the ground, or am I several tens of thousands of feet in the air? And what can I control in this moment? And that's probably the easiest example. But there's so many things that are going around. And I think it's so important to trying not to use the word mindful in this sentence, but to be aware of where we are and what we are and what's happening around us. And if everything is feeling chaotic, what are the tiny things that we can control? Can I find my pulse for just a second? Can I identify a path of least resistance to an exit where I can feel the sun, where I can breathe fresh air, where I can remove myself from a crowd of people? Can I turn my phone on do not disturb? So it's not about it's not about getting it all right, but it's about finding what are the things that I can chalk up as a win in these moments. In my mind, at least.
Absolutely. And it's all about finding what works for you as well. I think when people hear mindfulness, there is a pressure to get it all right, or they associate mindfulness with a practice like yoga or meditation or being super zen somewhere. But it's not always about that. Like you said, it's the little decisions that maybe are the path of least resistance to something that you want to achieve, finding little ways to make your existence more pleasant and more calm. I know for some people that's writing or gratitude or, closing the door at their office and actually doing a meditation for 3 or 4 minutes. And I also think when it comes to mindfulness, there's so much power in pausing and slowing down. A lot of folks that I share this with, I always use the example of driving. Like if someone cuts you off in traffic, it immediately spikes your cortisol levels. You're really stressed out. You might want to yell or scream or gesture or honk at them. But what would happen if you paused for a second and then gave yourself a minute to like check in with yourself, right? Like, where is this anger coming from? Is it the person who cut me off, or is it the fact that I have 10 emails on my computer that I have to answer? And like taking that pause and making the decision to bring your awareness to the present moment and not judge yourself, I think is transformational.
Hmm. Yeah, we're often way better at compartmentalizing in the rear view, right? Like at times we can be really unreliable narrators to our own journey, to our own story, and it's really like things only make sense after the fact. What am I mad about? What is frustrating me? And on the opposite, like what is giving me joy? Where can I access some of that joy? What is making me feel whole and at peace? Where can I access some of that? Well, I'd love to tap in a bit to your master's degree, so of clinical psychology. Could you talk a little bit about the intersection between the psyche, between uh, mindfulness practices, and our mental and emotional well-being? How cleanly do those connect?
Yes, absolutely. You're speaking my language, my friend. So, I guess, to talk about my program and my degree, it sounds a little wild when I explain it. A lot of folks are like, "Did you go to Hogwarts? I'm confused at what you're doing." So, I studied clinical and counseling psychology with an emphasis in spirit, mind, body work. And so, that means a million different things to every single person who is listening who will hear that and those words. For me and my experience, it was the marriage of Eastern and Western thought and culture and ritual and practices. So taking Western psychology, what we know from the traditional psych world, clinical counseling, therapy, that whole world, and bringing it together with Eastern practices like mindfulness, like meditation, but bringing them together in a way that is very accessible to people, doesn't have to be super lofty or academic. And so, really lucky that I was able to do this Hogwarts esque program. But I feel like if there's anything I took away, it's that this work is accessible and it can be very simple. So, when thinking about mindfulness, a really good example of East and West coming together is this thing called mindfulness-based stress reduction, which takes the power of mindfulness with what we know about stress and how it impacts our body, which I'd argue every single person knows what stress is at this point, to the max level, perhaps. But it brings those together and creates a way for you to essentially heal and tune into yourself using practices from both traditions. So, for example, a mindfulness-based stress reduction class or workshop might include, education about stress and how it affects our breath and why our palms get a little clammy when we're feeling stressed out, the different body responses that happen, and then marrying that with a practice like the five senses and drawing your awareness to things you can see and hear and smell and taste, or doing a brief, like actual meditation practice, maybe even a guided visualization. And so, some folks are really afraid to try these practices because they feel otherworldly and they're, not able to be described in scientific words, but we're actually finding that there's so much cool science behind it. And when you bring traditional psych and Eastern ritual together, there's just so much that we haven't even tapped into that we can find.
I love this theme of balance that's coming out. And it's a bit too on the nose to say yoga and balance. Like, yeah, we get it. Tree pose requires a lot of that. But you were just describing earlier how you wanted something still within you to combat the chaos that was in the disorganization that was outside. And you're talking about using the clinical, the book smart of Western psychology with the more esoteric and spiritual from the East. And there's balance there. And not everything needs to be a dichotomy. Not everything needs to be an either or, but life is very gray. That life is very muddled. Life finds its beauty not in the binary of day and night, but in the analog of daybreak and sunset and all the moments in between. So I love that you are setting us up for you can love one thing or the other, and you can love both. There's so much space to see all of this coexistence. And I think that really plays out in what we're seeing, especially in these past like 3 to 5 years of mental health care is health care.
Yeah.
You are mind and body. This is all one unit that you are bringing into this plane of existence. And so caring for one can care for the other. Neglecting one can be neglect of the other because it is all, in fact, part and parcel the same thing.
100%. And when you say that, so much comes to mind about mental health care and healing. For example, some folks might go to talk therapy and find that medium super transformational for them, but maybe at the end of the day, their body still doesn't feel good. And
Mm.
maybe someone else goes to art therapy and they don't say a word and they're able to paint what they're feeling. And that is transformational for them. So it's like, I totally agree with what you're saying. There's just so many pathways to get to where we want to be, and you can love more than one topic and pull. I always think of like healing as a toolbox. Like, what can you pull out of your toolbox to help you, whether it's Eastern ritual or Western medicine? Like, what makes you feel connected and empowered? And if it doesn't make you feel connected and empowered, you don't really have to listen to it, in my opinion.
Right, right. Well, let's talk about some of those tools, about some of, whether they're toolboxes or tool belts that are always on our person. I mean, obviously, we touched on it earlier, but mindfulness and meditation, they are big and sometimes loaded terms. And the reality is these terms span a wide array of cultures. There is no one culture that can claim authorship of this. And because of that, there are a ton of different practices. We've mentioned yoga. We've mentioned a meditation sit. What are some other practices that, in your mind, fall under this bigger umbrella of mindfulness and meditation?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think of mindfulness as the umbrella topic. And then within that, there are so many different practices that can bring you to the present moment. I'd say meditation is one of the most popular ones. And even within meditation, there's many different types. There's silent meditation, guided meditation, where you're listening to an audio that's maybe guiding you to visualize something or a certain prompt to think about. There's laughing meditation. If you ever YouTube that, it's a hilarious thing to watch. And it's
I love
truly
the
just
laughing yogi. Yeah.
so funny. Just like full body laughter, which is like truly an example of being in the present moment, because what else is there besides laughing at yourself and then laughing at everyone else who's laughing? It's so wonderful. So meditation, millions of ways to practice that. One of my favorite mindfulness practices, though, I have to say, is music. Talk about a practice that marries Eastern and Western, because you could analyze music theory all day and the mechanics of it, but there's something so out of this world about music that's deeply healing and transformative to people. So for me, sometimes my mindfulness practice of the day is listening to a playlist, pausing work to listen to a song that I really love, and just allowing myself to be present with the notes and the lyrics. That for me is one of the most powerful mindfulness exercises ever. Whether you are singing or playing an instrument or listening to a song, I think that can be great. Another awesome mindfulness practice is honestly just taking a walk. I know it sounds very basic, but if you think about the last time you took a stroll, maybe even without your phone, or walked, your dog or something in the park, and were forced to be present with another being, with yourself, with nature. That is a wonderful mindfulness practice. Speaking of nature, simply admiring nature and cultivating a sense of awe for what's around you is also mindfulness. And it doesn't have to be like traveling to a grand place and sitting on a mountaintop. It could be noticing the squirrels and the birds in your yard, or the little kid who's, playing on the street outside, like drawing your awareness to what's happening, and allowing yourself to really feel what's coming up in the moment. So I'd say
Mm,
music, walking, nature, meditation. Breath is a huge one. I think breathing is our anchor in life, metaphorically and physically. If you tune into your breath, you will always be brought back to the present moment. Noticing if it's shallow or if you're feeling a little panicked, and seeing if you can deepen it a little more. These are all like little ways, I think, to bring yourself back to the present when the world feels very turbulent.
yeah. Uh, Thank you for sharing just how varied it is, and again, the admittance that you did not just name every single one, but for on some level, there will be as many different types of mindfulness practice as there are people on the planet. Keep looking until you find something that does bring you some joy, that does bring you some rest, that does bring you an ounce of stillness and allow you to just kind of get lost in the depth of yourself. I think this is where community comes in. That mindfulness is a community exercise, even if it is practiced individually. Uh, Telling people, talking about what you've discovered in your own practice is going to be an encouragement to others. I'm taken right now to a conversation that we had at the very beginning of the pandemic with our friend Ebony Janice, and she introduced us to this song by Janae Aiko called Trigger Protection Mantra. And that's been a place that I've gone back to, a song that I've come back to time and again, just as a moment of peace. And that was taught to me from a friend. So yeah, borrow, keep borrowing, borrow from your friends and family. Yeah. So as we're talking about these different practices, it's one thing to name the practice, but I think it's also important to realize that these practices do have real world consequences. That these are tools that can affect mental health challenges. How have you, Tianna, from a firsthand perspective, seen mindfulness practices influence and um, offset effects of depression and anxiety and other mental health challenges?
Yeah. So I think, there are many, many ways that you can use mindfulness as a healing tool. And when it comes to something like anxiety or depression, I think of first I know it sounds very broad, but first I think of the simple awareness of what you're going through. For example, when I think back to college, when I was experiencing anxiety and depression, I didn't really know what was going on because I was so disconnected from my body. I wasn't even able to recognize, you know, uh, my different types of stress. For instance, running around in college doing a million things, my breath would often be shallow, my palms would be sweating, I would feel sometimes like I was suffocating, and I didn't know what that feeling was. And I was trying so hard to press it down that I didn't realize, like, hey, these are symptoms of anxiety, and there are things you can do to overcome these symptoms of anxiety, or at least cope with them and manage them. So I think mindfulness can be really helpful in just bringing awareness to what's happening in your body, what thoughts are racing through your head at any given moment. A lot of practices in clinical psychology, like I'm thinking of things like CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT, like they incorporate mindfulness exercises and mindfulness themes, but you don't always realize that it's mindfulness that we're talking about. Um, I can say I used to work in a substance use treatment center in New York City. And, some of the therapists would have folks do meditations in groups, individually. There were yoga groups. There were ways that we were able to bring that traditional clinical lens together with mindfulness to really help people unpack their emotions, unpack their anxiety, depression, trauma. There's so much as well when you talk about specifically, I think depression and trauma, where we hold a lot in our bodies. A lot of people, you might have heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score. That's really referenced a lot in the psych world. But, tuning into your body, having that awareness, that mindful awareness of the present moment and what's happening, can really just open up the doors for you to, reflect on things in your own life, how they might be showing up in your physical body, affecting your energy, all of that. So again, I know that was a really long-winded answer, but I think the awareness piece is huge. And just giving people a space to bring their whole selves into
Hmm.
their healing journey and not feeling limited, like they have to have the perfect words and talk therapy or describe their symptoms in a certain way. Like sometimes it's just being and not doing anything.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you kind of in that we're addressing a bit of kind of performance anxiety when it comes to talk therapy. Am I telling a compelling enough story? Am I saying it right? Am I using the right words? Am I confusing? Am I making any sense? And when it comes to mindfulness, you are released of that sort of burden. And I think it's fair to acknowledge that um, other access points for mental health often do come with some other hurdles. Namely financial. It costs money to find a counselor. Now, to Right Love, we do what we can in order to identify cost reduced and sometimes free services. We offer scholarships, but often, we know that the financial burden can be one that is a complete deterrent to someone seeking traditional outlets for therapy and counseling. But when it comes to mindfulness, these are pretty free. You were talking about getting outside can be the start to a mindful practice. Something sitting in silence, being aware of your breath, that is mindful. But still, I think a lot of us carry with us this insecurity of, am I doing that right? So for the people that are listening who may be interested in introducing a mindfulness practice into their lives, what would you suggest as an accessible, perhaps even completely unintimidating starting point for someone looking to get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm really glad you brought up accessibility and lack of accessibility because, oh, yes, mental health is very expensive. It's super hard to find a therapist in a lot of places and still very heavily stigmatized. But I think with mindfulness, a really fun place to start is your breath. I know it sounds so simple and basic, but you'd be surprised how many people don't connect to their breath or don't have any awareness of how they're breathing. I can use like my family as an example. I remember when I started down this mindfulness journey and was practicing leading some meditations and things, I would do it with my siblings and my parents, and we would all realize, like, wow, I did not realize how shallow my breath has been all day because I've been working so hard. But that realization alone can be huge, because then that impacts your everyday life, and you carry that thought with you now for the rest of your life of like, tune into your breath. Is my breathing okay? Um, or am I rushing through the moment? I think a really easy place to start as well, of course, like accessibility wise, you would probably have to have like a phone or computer. So there is a level of, maybe lack of accessibility for some folks, but there are many free apps or recordings online that you can access that can help you just tune into your body and your mind, your emotions. Um, one of my favorite apps is called Insight Timer, and they have a lot of different silent, instrumental, and guided meditations that you can choose from. And that is a really great place to start that I always recommend to people. You can look up stuff for mental health, depression, anxiety, self compassion, all sorts of things. But another free resource is writing or the creative arts. I find that, you might not have access to like instruments around you or something, but art making, journaling, um, even just community, connecting with people. If you have people around you, that I think in itself might sound like a stretch, but that can be a mindfulness practice. Is just engaging in a good conversation with somebody and being in the state of flow where you're so present and engaged in something that everything else starts to melt away. If you have pets at home, that's a, maybe even free resource as well. Like, notice what your pet's doing, or your kid, or something like that. That intentional awareness, again, is in and of itself a mindfulness practice. So,
Yeah, again, that sense of balance, the getting outside yourself to access something within yourself. And I love that. I love that thought. Maybe something worth meditating on. Well, it's, to that degree of finding something worth meditating on, at To Write Love, we often remind people that you're invited to take a pause, to take a breath, to find hope, to be grounded and find comfort in your breathing. That's something that you mentioned is in no trite way kind of the building block of this conversation and of every conversation. So with that, Tianna, we'd love to have you lead us in a bit of a guided breathing meditation. Why don't we put this conversation, kind of put some skin on it. Let's see what this actually looks and feels and sounds like.
yes, absolutely. I would love that. And keeping in mind, wherever you're listening from, like, if you save this and come back to it later, this is something you can return to at any time. But for the sake of today, we'll do just a brief mindful body scan. So if you're in a place where you can, I invite you to find a comfortable seat. And this can be in a chair, on the ground, on your bed, anything that makes you feel safe and peaceful. You can even lie down if you want, if it feels safe and comfortable. You may even feel the urge to fall asleep, and that's okay if you do. But I invite you to find a comfortable seat, maybe take a couple of shoulder rolls, or roll your neck around your wrists, wiggle the fingers and the toes, and just notice the energy that you have today. It's okay if it's feeling a little bit tired, sleepy, or slow. Maybe you're feeling the opposite, and maybe you just had a bunch of coffee and you're buzzing and ready to go. And once you've come to a little bit of presence and awareness of your energy today, maybe find some stillness in your seat, taking a deep breath and releasing any tension, whether physical, mental, that you might be holding on to. Starting to release any tension, any control in the jaw. Noticing if your eyebrows are tight or furrowing. Relaxing the shoulders down and away from the ears. And if you're in a seat, noticing what it's like to be grounded in your chair, noticing what it's like to have both of your feet flat on the floor, and just arriving in this present moment, no matter what has happened before this, no matter what's happening after. Depending on your comfort level, you can allow your hands to fall gently in your lap, either palms face up or face down. You can also bring one hand to your belly and one hand to your chest as another way of tuning into your breath and just noticing what it's like to have the belly rise and fall. Taking a moment to be really present with yourself and speak really kindly to yourself if you notice any fidgeting or distraction that's coming up. And I'll invite you to either close your eyes, or if you want to keep them open, you can maybe gaze a couple of feet in front of you, not focusing on anything specific, but allowing your eyes to just be at a soft gaze. And whether your eyes are open or closed, start to imagine, start to visualize the space just above the top of your head. It might seem a little funny at first. And as you visualize this space, maybe you think of a warm golden light. Maybe you think of your favorite color. Maybe you even visualize a song that makes you feel really safe. Maybe you imagine a place or a location that makes you feel happy and nourished. And whether you're thinking of a color or an image or a song, continue to breathe at your own pace and welcome that energy into your physical body. Imagining that it's washing over you from the top of your head all the way down to your toes. And continuing to take deep breaths at your own pace. Visualize the top of your head, the forehead, releasing any tension in the eyebrows, the temples, your eyes and cheekbones, relaxing the muscles of the face and gently dropping the jaw if you notice that it's clenching a little bit. Continuing to be aware of your breath and releasing any holding on or tension in your chest, your neck. Drawing your awareness down the body to your torso, noticing what it's like to have the belly and the lungs just rise and fall with your breath. And continuing your awareness down the body, noticing what it's like to be rooted in your seat or held by the ground if you're laying down or on a different surface. And drawing your awareness down the body to the legs, the knees, visualizing the shins and the calves, drawing that awareness all the way down to the ankles, the top of the feet, the bottom of the feet, all the way down to your toes. And if your feet are on the ground, just noticing what it's like to be rooted, to arrive here in this present moment, wherever you are listening from, whatever energy brought you to listen to this recording today. Noticing where you're at mentally, physically, emotionally, and not judging yourself for whatever you're feeling in this moment. And once again, I'll invite you to imagine that color, that safe place, that song or that feeling that you thought of at the beginning of this practice. Once again, imagining that that energy is filling the body all the way from the toes, through the body, and all the way up to the top of the head. And together, wherever you're tuning in from, we'll take 3 final deep breaths in together to seal in this practice. So, first time, deep breath in, fill the lungs, fill the belly, and exhale, letting go of any stress you're holding on to. Second time, deep breath in and exhale, letting go of any final bits of tension. And third time, deepest breath you've taken all day. Inhale and exhale, extending some kindness in your mind. Maybe being proud of yourself for showing up and carving out just a few minutes of your day to be present, to remember why you're here, and to remember that you're safe and you're exactly where you're supposed to be. In whatever position or posture you're in, you can start to wiggle the fingers, wiggle the toes, maybe roll some, do some shoulder rolls or some wrist rolls. And then if your eyes are closed, you can slowly start to blink them open and then come back to the space.